Montana Territory. August 1887, the stagecoach wheels snapped with a crack like gunfire, pitching the whole rig sideways and hurling Genevie Whitehall into the dust of the wagon trail. Her bonnet flew off. Her knees hit hard packed earth. She was too stunned to cry out. When the world stopped spinning, she pushed herself halfway upright and blinked against the sun. The driver cursed as he jumped down to inspect the broken axle. But Genevie only stared at the wide, empty land stretching in every direction, golden grass, a few scraggly cottonwoods, and the distant rise of buttes on the horizon. Her valise had burst open beside her, scattering what little she owned. A cracked hand mirror, a folded letter, a pale blue dress she had hoped to wear when she met the man who had sent for her. Genevie drew a shaky breath. Her gloves were torn, her knees were bloodied, and she was alone. The driver shouted something toward the back of the stage, but the other two passengers were long gone, headed to Fort Benton. Genevie's stop had been this empty patch of road near a place called Elk Hollow. She had no idea which direction the town was in. She gathered her skirt and tried to stand, but her ankle gave way. She crumpled back to the dirt, a sob catching in her throat. A horse snorted somewhere behind her. Genevie looked up. A man sat astride a tall bay, the sun behind him making it hard to see his face. He wore a trail-worn hat and a coat that had seen years of hard riding. Dust clung to him like another layer of skin. He dismounted in one easy motion and stepped toward her. "You all right, ma'am?" His voice was steady, low, with a rasp like wind through pine. She tried to answer but only shook her head. He bent and offered a hand. "Let me help." She hesitated, then took it. His grip was warm and solid. He pulled her gently to her feet, holding her steady while she tested her ankle again. It still burned. She bit her lip to keep from crying out. "Looks like it's sprained," he said. "You need to sit." He guided her to a fallen log and crouched beside her, his eyes scanning her face. "Name's Isiah Prescott." "Genevie," she said quietly. "Genevie Whitehall," he nodded once. "You from around here?" "No, I came from Ohio. I was supposed to meet someone, a man named Earl Dobbins. We'd been writing letters. He asked me to marry him." Isiah's jaw tensed. "Mail order arrangement," she nodded, ashamed. "You sure he was meeting you here?" He said he would be. She blinked hard. "But the stage is early." "I do not see any sign of him." Isiah looked down the trail, then back. "This Earl got a description. He said he is tall, with red hair and a long coat. He would have a wagon with black paint along the sides." Isiah rubbed the back of his neck. "No one passed me coming from Elk Hollow. I rode out this morning." Genevie's shoulders sagged. "Maybe he changed his mind." Isiah looked at her a long moment. "Maybe, but I do not think you should wait here alone." She looked up at him, eyes rimmed with dust and tears. "I do not have anywhere else to go." "You do now," he said simply. He packed her things into his saddlebag, tied her valise behind his saddle, and helped her up onto the horse. She winced as her ankle shifted, but he steadied her with one hand on her waist. Then he swung up behind her, careful not to jostle her. "My place is about 5 miles west. It is not much, but it is warm and safe." She nodded, too tired to argue. They rode in silence most of the way. The land rolled gently, dotted with pine and sagebrush. A hawk circled overhead. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the grass. Isiah's home turned out to be a small log cabin tucked near a stream, with a corral and a low barn beside it. Smoke curled from the chimney. A dog barked once and trotted over to meet them. He helped her down, lifting her like she weighed nothing at all. She clung to his shoulder as her ankle throbbed. Inside, the cabin was tidy. A narrow bed against one wall, a small table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with books and tools. It smelled of pine wood and coffee. "Sit," he said gently, guiding her to the bed. "Let me look at that ankle." He removed her boot with care, then unwrapped a clean cloth and dipped it in water from the basin. "You are lucky it is just a sprain." "I do not feel lucky," she said, her voice small. He glanced up. "You are not alone out here. That counts for something." She met his eyes, then really looked. His face was lean, sun-worn, with deep lines at the corners of his eyes. He looked tired, but not unkind. His hands moved with a quiet steadiness that made her feel like maybe, just maybe, the world would not fall apart again. That night he made stew from dried beef and potatoes. She sipped it slowly, her stomach tight with nerves but grateful for the warmth. "You built this place yourself?" she asked. "Every beam and board," he said. "Came out here 10 years ago, thought I needed to be away from folks. Turns out, sometimes too much quiet is its own kind of noise." She looked down at the bowl in her lap. "I left everything, my family. They said I was foolish chasing a stranger's promise. Maybe they were right." He leaned back in his chair. "You do not strike me as foolish. Brave, maybe. A little too trusting, sure, but not foolish." A flush rose in her cheeks. He stood and fetched a spare blanket, then laid it over her legs. "You can have the bed tonight. I will take the floor." She reached out, touched his wrist lightly. "Thank you, Isiah." He looked at her hand on his skin and nodded. "Sleep well, Genevie." As he banked the fire and lay down on the floor with his hat over his face, Genevie stared at the ceiling and listened to the wind outside. She was far from home, abandoned, hurt, but she was not afraid. Somehow, with him near, she felt safe. And come morning, she was still thinking of the way his hand had steadied her. The light outside had softened to a pale gold when Genevie stirred. For a moment, she forgot where she was. The quilt beneath her hand was rough spun, not the one from her childhood room. The air carried smoke and pine sap, not the scent of river water and lilacs. She turned her head and saw Isiah seated at the table, whittling something small and deliberate in his hand. "Morning," he said without looking up. Her voice came scratchy. "How long have you been awake?" "Long enough to watch the sun rise twice over the ridge." She sat up slowly, bracing her weight on the side of the bed. The ache in her ankle flared, but not as sharp as before. "That sounds like something a poet would say." He gave a short breath through his nose. "I'd be a poor one. Can't read verse without falling asleep." She caught the edge of a smile in his voice and leaned forward to see what he was carving. It looked like a bird, small, unfinished, wings barely shaped. "You carve often?" she asked. "When the weather keeps me inside too long." He set the piece down and stood. "You hungry?" she nodded. He handed her a slice of cornbread and a tin cup of cooled coffee. She took both, grateful, and noticed the marks of old scars on his knuckles. Not the kind made in battle, but the kind earned splitting wood and fixing fence posts. The silence between them settled easy for a while. Then he said, "I'll head into Elk Hollow today." She looked up, startled. "Because of me, because of Earl Dobbins." He started rolling down his sleeves. "If he's in town, he'll answer for leaving you on the roadside." Genevie's hands tightened around the cup. "What if he had a reason? Then I'll hear it." "But if he didn't, he doesn't deserve your worry." She didn't argue. Her stomach twisted, not from the coffee. He crossed the room, took a battered felt coat from a peg, and paused at the door. "You'll be all right here," she nodded. "I'll manage." He left without another word, the door tapping shut behind him. She listened to the hoofbeats fade, then eased herself to the table. She hated being idle. Her hands itched to be useful. There were dishes to wash, a broom by the hearth, and a basket of mending by the wall. She worked in silence, careful with her ankle, careful not to disturb more than she needed to. She folded the quilt, swept the corner under the table, stitched a loose hem on a work shirt that wasn't hers. The rhythm steadied her. Outside, the wind scratched lightly at the walls. By the time the sun reached the narrow window above the stove, she had laid out the shirt to dry and returned to the chair by the hearth. Her fingers ached pleasantly. A quiet hour passed. Then two. When she heard hoofbeats again, she stood too fast and had to grip the table's edge until the spinning passed. Isiah stepped through the door with dust on his coat and a narrowed expression. "Well?" she asked. He didn't sit. "Dobbins left town 3 days ago. Sold his wagon to a man on the Bozeman Trail. No note, no forwarding name." Genevie pressed her hand to the table. "I asked around," he said. He'd done this before, promised a woman in Idaho Springs, then never sent for her. She stared at the floor, cheeks burning. "I was foolish." "No." His voice was low but firm. "You were honest, he wasn't." She looked up. "What do I do now?" He set his hat down and crossed to the stove. "You rest, you eat. Think on what you want, not on what he promised." "I can't stay here forever." He nodded. "I know." She hesitated. "You don't know me, Isiah. You don't owe me anything." He ladled out soup into one bowl, then another. "Maybe not, but I know what it is to be left behind." She took the bowl from him, fingers brushing. "Was it a woman?" He pulled out the other chair and sat. "No. My brother. My mother died giving him life. Pa drank his way through what was left. When the boy turned 18, he left for Oregon with a wild idea and no word since." Genevie stirred the soup, not sure what to say. Isiah went on, voice quieter now. "I built this place thinking maybe he'd come find me, but people don't always return." A long silence settled, not uncomfortable, just deep. "I suppose I need to find work," Genevie said at length. "I can sew. I've taught children. I'm not afraid of hard labor. There's a widow in town with 3 boys and a back porch falling in," he said. "She's been looking for help. I'd like to meet her." He nodded. "When you're ready." They ate with the wind pressing against the windows and a fire flickering low. When the bowls were empty, Genevie stood and carried them to the basin. Isiah watched her, then said, "You didn't cry, not once." She set the bowls down. "What would it change?" He didn't answer. Outside, the dog barked once and settled. Genevie turned from the basin. "You meant what you said about this place not being much, but it's the first roof I've had over my head where no one expected anything from me." He leaned forward, forearms on the table. "I don't expect nothing. I expect you to rest, heal, take your time." She met his gaze. "And after that," his voice didn't shift, "that's yours to choose." She nodded once and turned toward the small window where the light was softening again. Not golden this time, but the blue-gray tint of evening. She didn't know what would come next, but she could breathe. And that was more than she'd hoped for when she'd fallen in the dust. 2 days later, Genevie stood beneath the cottonwood behind Isiah's cabin, a basket of washed linens clutched beneath her arm. The swelling in her ankle had eased enough to let her hobble short distances, though Isiah still insisted she lean on his old cane when the ground dipped or rose too sudden. The tree's shade gave her a place to breathe. The breeze stirred through the high branches, tugging at the edge of her sleeve. She hung the linens one by one on the line he'd strung between 2 posts, the clothespins clicking into place with quiet finality. "You always work this quiet." She turned to see Isiah leaning against the barn doorway, sleeves rolled to the elbows, his hair damp from the pump. He was holding a dented tin mug in one hand, steam curling up from its rim. "I don't see the point in making noise unless it's needed," she said. "I've met plenty who disagree. I was raised in a house where quiet meant peace, not absence." He took a slow sip from the mug. "Your folks still in Ohio?" "My father passed when I was 16. My mother remarried and moved east with her new husband. I stayed behind a while, but the house didn't feel like mine anymore." Isiah didn't press. He stepped off the barn stoop and crossed to where she stood, setting the mug down on a tree stump. "I can finish those," he said, nodding at the basket. "I've got it. You've done enough for me already." He didn't argue, just picked up a corner of a damp pillowcase and held it while she pinned the other side. The silence between them had shifted into something companionable, like the low hum of cicadas at dusk. She glanced at him. "You've lived here 10 years. Ever think of leaving?" He shook his head. "There's no place waiting for me beyond this. I've got land that holds steady, a roof that keeps out snow. Sometimes that's enough." Sometimes. He looked past her, toward the edge of the trees where the hills rolled like the backs of sleeping bison. "Some days I want a voice beside mine, just one that stays." Genevieve's fingers paused on the laundry line. "You ever come close? There was a girl in Helena once, before the cabin. She wanted fine dresses, city lights. I wanted fences and quiet. We didn't last long." She nodded, then resumed pinning the last of the linens. "I never wanted city lights, but I thought I'd have a place where someone needed me." "You do now," he said without looking at her. She let that settle, the words folding into the air between them without weight or demand. The wind tugged at her hem and her fingers found the edge of the basket again. "I met the widow," he said after a long moment. "Lita Haskins. She's kind but sharp-eyed. Said you were welcome to visit when you're ready." "Not yet," Genevie replied. "Soon." Isiah nodded. "There's no rush. She's not going anywhere." They stayed there until the last of the linens hung still. Then she turned to him. "Would you show me the stream?" He didn't ask why. Just said, "Bring the cane," and led the way past the corral, keeping pace with her careful steps. The creek ran shallow and clear, winding through a low cut in the grassland. Willow branches leaned toward the water like they were listening. She sat on a flat stone and dipped her fingers in. The cold bit pleasantly. "There's trout farther upstream," he said, crouching nearby. "Used to fish here in late spring, haven't in years." "Why not?" he shrugged. "Didn't seem worth the trouble cooking for one." She let her fingers trail through the water. "I could learn to clean them." He glanced at her, eyes narrowing just slightly. "You saying you'd stay long enough to learn?" She didn't answer, not right away. The water rippled around her wrist, catching sunlight in quick flashes. "I haven't made up my mind," she said. "But I haven't ruled it out." He nodded once, slow and thoughtful. "Fair enough." She looked at him then, really looked. The line of his jaw, the quiet steadiness he carried, not like a man shouldering burden, but like someone who'd already learned how to live with it. "I'd need something of my own," she said. "A place in town, maybe, a way to earn." "You would have it," he said. "Whatever shape it takes." She stood, brushing her skirts free of dust. "If I stay, it'll be because I choose to. Not because I was left with no better option. I wouldn't want it any other way." They walked back without speaking, the sound of their steps softened by the grass. At the cabin, Genevie laid the cane against the doorframe before stepping inside. That night, when the moon rose low and wide above the trees, she stood at the window and watched its light spill across the yard. Behind her, Isiah stirred by the hearth, adding a log to the fire. He didn't ask her what she was thinking, and she didn't tell him. But the warmth that settled in her chest wasn't from the fire. It came slowly, like the kind of comfort that didn't ask for anything loud or sudden, just time, and someone willing to share the quiet. The next Saturday came warm and dry, the kind of August day that made the wind feel like breath off a sun-heated stone. Clouds clung low along the far hills, but here the sky stayed clear, wide, and endlessly blue. Genevie stood at the fence gate, her hand resting on the top rail, ankle wrapped snug beneath her skirt, waiting for Isiah to return from the south pasture. She had asked the night before to go into Elk Hollow herself. Not for work, not yet, but for fabric, a simple length of muslin and a bit of thread. Something of her own to make, stitch by stitch. He hadn't questioned her reason. only nodded and said he'd ready the wagon. Now the wagon wheels creaked over the ridge and he came into view driving slow, reins loose in one hand, his hat tilted low but not to hide. She opened the gate before he could dismount. "You sure you're ready for town?" he asked once she'd climbed up beside him. "I'm sure I'm tired of waiting to be useful." He gave the reins a slight twitch, and the wagon rolled forward. "Folks'll ask questions. I've got answers." They rode in easy silence at first, the road winding through patches of rabbit brush and bunchgrass gone silver at the tips. Birds darted from fence posts, and once they passed a pair of riders headed the other way with rifles slung over their shoulders and pelts tied behind their saddles. "You ever think about marrying again?" she asked as they crossed a shallow stream, the water drumming quiet against the wheels. Isiah didn't glance over. "What makes you ask that? You've got the makings of a settled man, land, a home, a good name in town. Seems the question would have come up." "It has." He adjusted the reins. "But I never felt the right reason to say yes." She looked out over the grassland, letting the quiet stretch before she spoke again. "What would be the right reason?" He didn't answer right away. "Not need, not loneliness, just someone who doesn't pull you from yourself." She let that settle. They reached Elk Hollow by early afternoon. The town wasn't large, but it breathed with life, children running between storefronts, a blacksmith hammering something red hot into shape, two older men arguing over a barrel of spoiled apples outside the mercantile. Isiah pulled the wagon alongside the boardwalk and tied the team. "I'll be at the feed store," he said. "Take what you need." Inside, the mercantile was warm and close, the air filled with dust and the smell of kerosene and cinnamon. Genevie moved through the narrow aisles slowly, fingers brushing bolts of fabric stacked high on the back wall. She chose a muted green calico, a spool of thread, and a packet of needles, then paused near the counter where a small tray of buttons caught her eye. "They're from St. Louis," the shopkeeper said, a woman past middle age with a deep crease between her brows. "Came by freight last month." Genevie picked up one bone-colored with 4 holes and a faint carved edge. "I'll take 6. The woman wrapped them carefully. "You're the one staying out at Isiah Prescott's place?" "Yes. You kin?" "No, just—" Genevie lifted her chin. "He offered help when no one else did." The woman studied her a beat too long, then nodded. "He's a good man, quiet but fair." Genevie left with her bundle wrapped in brown paper. She found Isiah at the wagon, loading a sack of oats. "They ask after you," he said without turning, only enough to see if I flinched. He glanced over then. "And did you?" "No." They rode back through the late sun, the land golden and open on all sides, the sky paling toward evening. At the cabin, she laid the fabric across the table and began to plan the shape of a dress, sturdy, serviceable, something to wear when she felt like herself again. Later, after supper, she sat on the porch with her sewing in her lap and the sky deepening above. Isiah came out with 2 mugs, one for her, one for himself, and sat on the step below her, shoulders curved forward, legs stretched long. "I don't know what I'll do yet," she said, eyes still on the needle in her hand. "You don't have to." "I want to," he nodded slowly. "Then start here." She looked down at him, at the way the light from the open door caught the edge of his jaw, the quiet steadiness in his posture. "I thought I was coming west to be chosen," she said. "Turns out I needed to choose for myself." He didn't speak. Just reached up and touched her hand once, gently, like testing the edge of something too long kept at a distance. She threaded another stitch and didn't pull away. The stars came out above the pines. The wind shifted, cooler now, carrying the scent of dry grass and river silt. She kept sewing until it was too dark to see. And when she rose, he followed her inside, neither of them breaking the quiet that had settled deep and sure between them. The first frost came early that year. Genevie woke before dawn to a thin lace of ice on the cabin's windows, the kind that caught the light and made the world outside look like it had been dusted in sugar. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and stepped onto the porch, her breath rising in pale strands as she watched the sky lighten over the ridge. Behind her, Isiah stirred in the cabin, the sound of him moving through the morning like the low rhythm of something steady and known. She didn't turn when he came to stand beside her, his coat already buttoned, his boots damp where he'd crossed the yard. "You can smell winter coming," he said. "I never knew it smelled like smoke and pine needles." He nodded. "It's the waiting season out here. Everything slows before the snow." She looked out toward the pasture where the last of the grass had turned brittle. "I never liked waiting." "You don't wait now," he said. "You make your place." She glanced up at him. "I've been thinking of staying." He said nothing, just studied her with the same quiet attention he gave to broken tools or sick calves, like he'd already seen the shape of it and was only waiting for her to name it. "I'd need to sell some work," she added. "Lita said I could use her back porch to sew, trade dresses for flour or wood, maybe. She's got a good eye for folks who mean what they say." "I do." He looked out across the land. "Then you should stay." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled free a folded square of calico, the same green she'd bought weeks ago, now sewn into the beginnings of a child's tunic. The stitches were small and even, the collar unfinished. He took it gently when she handed it to him. "You making these for trade?" "No," she said. "One day I might need it." He looked at her, slow and still. "You telling me something I'm not yet," she said, "but I'm hoping." The silence between them wasn't heavy, it was full. He folded the tunic and returned it to her hands. "Then I'll hope too." That afternoon they rode into town again, but this time it was her idea. The church bell rang twice as they stepped inside, the boards beneath their boots creaking with age. There was no service that day, only the preacher mending hymnals by the stove. Genevie approached him with her head high and her voice steady. "We'd like to be married." The man looked between them, then set his glasses on the bridge of his nose. "Well now, that's a fine thing to say out loud." Isiah spoke next. "We want it quiet, no fuss." The preacher chuckled. "Most things that last don't begin with noise." They signed the ledger that same hour. Genevie wore her best dress, the sleeves newly pressed, and Isiah wore the same coat he'd had since she met him, the dust brushed clean. There were no flowers, no music. Just the lean of his hand against hers and the way they stood close enough to share breath. Afterward, they walked to Lita Haskins' house. Lita looked them both over and nodded once, then told Genevie she had a stack of mending that needed a careful hand. "I don't expect charity," Genevie said. "No one gets it here," Lita replied. "But we do trade in kindness." By mid-November, Genevie had set up a small sewing corner in the back room of the cabin, and Isiah had added a table near the stove for her patterns. She took in work from town a coat for the blacksmith's wife, a quilt lining for the schoolteacher's wagon bed, and in return, they brought flour, preserves, and once, a jar of honey wrapped in oilcloth. Each night they sat at the table and shared what they had. Sometimes she read aloud from books he hadn't touched in years. Sometimes he told her about the land where the elk bedded down in winter, how to read the sky for storms, which trees creaked before the wind changed. Their hands found each other, often not out of habit, but out of choice. When the first snow fell, it came soft and heavy, blanketing the roof and fence posts in silence. Genevie stood at the door and watched it settle, her hands resting on the small curve of her belly. Isiah came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "You warm enough?" "I am," she said. They didn't speak again. just watched the snow collect like time itself was pausing to witness them. The day their child was born, March wind rattled the shutters and the creek ran fast with meltwater. Lita came to help, and by dusk, Genevie held a daughter against her chest, her face red and furious with new breath. Isiah sat beside them, one hand on Genevie's back, the other cradling the child's foot as if it were something too precious to trust the air with. "She's strong," he said. "She'll need to be." They named her Clara. That spring, Isiah built a cradle from pine and lined it with scraps from Genevie's sewing. He carved a bird into the headboard, one wing lifted as if ready to rise. They planted a garden together near the creek, beans, cabbage, and a row of sunflowers for Genevie's mother, who'd once named them Lucky. By the time summer returned, the cabin held more than warmth and work. It held laughter, quiet, real, and earned. It held the creak of floorboards under small feet, the smell of bread rising near the fire, the sound of Isiah's voice humming low while he carved new buttons from bone. And at night, when the world quieted and the moon hung low over the ridge, Isiah would lay beside her, his hand resting over hers, their breath slowing in rhythm. "You ever regret it?" she asked once, her voice barely above a whisper. He turned to her, eyes soft in the dark. "No. I only regret waiting so long to find you." She leaned into him then, her head against his chest, and listened to the steady beat beneath his rib cage. Outside, the wind moved through the pines. Inside, they kept a life stitched, carved, and carried together, piece by piece, until it was whole. And they never left it, not once,